So this next video is about sort of more about this mathematical communication in practice. This is another one of sort of like a six-part series in how to communicate via a variety of different tools. So in this video, I'll be talking about tables. So in terms of Criterion B, and I mentioned this at the beginning of each of these videos, the IB guide sums up Criterion B with these things. You're supposed to use appropriate language, mathematical language. You're supposed to define key terms, and you're supposed to use multiple forms of mathematical representation whenever they're appropriate. The trouble is, the guide doesn't really tell us about how to use and how to format formulas and diagrams, tables, charts, graphs, models. And so that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to be talking about ways that we should use tables, mistakes that you should avoid, and things that you should make sure that you do in order to communicate well mathematically by using tables. So first of all, what's the purpose of a table? The purpose of a table in mathematical writing is basically to convey large amounts of information from a variety of categories to the reader. It's generally not the kind of thing that you would use a graph for. You might be taking your table and coming up with a graph or coming up with an equation. But the table itself is really just sharing a bunch of information with the reader. And we need to we need to be careful that we don't turn the strength of a table, the ability to share a lot of information, into a weakness. It's easy to just kind of like table dump, where you just bam, here's all my data. And if you try and give too much information, the table ends up being less useful because you sort of information overload your reader. So we want to be on the lookout for that. So a few general comments and guidance about tables. So the first thing, and probably the most important thing, unless it is absolutely necessary, you should not split your table across multiple pages. And I have sort of 2 points of guidance on that, right? So the first one is, if you have a table that splits across 2 pages, then just start the table on the next page. You can either do like like Alt Enter or Command Enter. There's like something with Enter, depends on your keyboard, that lets you just like force a new page break. So that's one way that you can do it. You could also just go above your table and just hit Enter a bunch of times until it ends up on the next page. You generally don't, like, some students I think worry about, oh, but that means my previous page is a bunch of white space. Fine, no big deal, especially when the reader turns the page and sees, oh, there's a big table here. That explains why there was a bunch of white space there. It's really, really not a problem. It's a much bigger problem if your table splits up. So that's one thing, right? If the table is short enough, just start it at the top of the next page. Now the next thing, if a table takes more than a page, even when it starts at the very top of the page, you should really think about whether you need to actually include all of that table and all of that data in the body of your paper. If the reader doesn't really need to see any of the data, and there's a lot of it, you should just put that table in the appendix and just put a couple of rows in as a sample in the paper. So if you're doing something like, oh, I conducted a survey, and here were people's raw responses, and you've got like 100 lines of table, nobody needs to see those 100 lines of table. Put it in the appendix, make sure it's there so that people can see it if they want to, but like, you don't need to flip through a bunch of pages to glance through something like that. So I hope that made sense. If your table's really long, think about just putting in the appendix with a couple of rows there. Now, if your reader does need to see all of the data, like you want them to see all of it but at different points, maybe you could just put some of the data in at that part of your paper. Maybe you're like, well, I really just want them to see like these 10 rows. Great, show them those 10 rows, put all of it in the appendix, and if they need to see more of it later, bring more of it up there. It can actually be frustrating when a paper has like a page and a half of tables, and then 3 pages later you're like, oh, well, from the table 3 pages ago, we can now look at, rows 25 to 34. Like, you might as well just show those rows later. Again, you could put the whole thing in the appendix and then just bring out the rows that you need as you need them in the paper. So again, I hope that made sense. I think sometimes it can feel like you need to put all of the table right when you make the table, but it's okay to use the parts of the table that you need, use the data that you need as you get to it. So that was all about not splitting tables across multiple pages. really, really, really don't split tables across multiple pages. Other things, make sure that your table headings are descriptive enough for the reader to understand what the data is. If your data has units, include those units. You should think hard about what data should be included in your table. And this is one of those challenging things. If there's data that you collected that you ultimately didn't need or use, exclude it from your table. There's no point in putting it there and just like muddying the waters of your paper. If you want, if you're like, because it can be hard to be like, but I collected like 10 pieces of data for each thing. Okay, true. But if you only use 3 of them, then just show me those 3. You can tell me in the narrative. I also collected data about all these other things. The full data is found in the appendix. Appendix is a great place for things that you want to include in case other people want to see them, but don't need to be included in your paper. As with all forms of mathematical communication, the table should fit into the flow of the document. You're writing a math paper, you're explaining what you're doing. You should have text in your paper that lets the reader know what they should be looking at. What am I supposed to do with this table? Because otherwise people are just like looking at numbers and you're like, what do you want me to look at? Like, I see that there's a table here. Why did you include it? And if the reason is, well, because I thought there should be a table, that's not enough. There should be description as to why it's there and how the reader should be using that information. So just like I've done in all of the other videos on this one, I am going to give you 3 examples of the same data getting better and better and better used in a table. So consider an exploration about finding out the scoring system in Just Dance 2021. So actually, I did a mini IA on this one, so that's why I'm using this one. So here we go. Example 1. While playing Just Dance 2021, I recorded the score information that came up at the end of each dance. The information is in the table below. And so you see we've got a table here. And then we go to the next page, and there's a bunch more information. And you can see how, because this went onto a second page, I can't even tell what these numbers mean, right? There were table headings up here that kind of made sense, but as soon as I go to the new page, I can't see those anymore. Even on this screen, I can't fit it all in one thing. If you were flipping through a paper, when you flip to the next page, I have to go back to the previous page to see what these headings were to be able to jump back forward. There's also, I mean, there's just like, there's, what, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 10 columns in this table. Do I really need all 10 of these? So what was done well here? Well, for one thing, at least the table had headings. They weren't super duper clear, but there were headings. Okay. Things that could be improved. The table headings weren't particularly clear. I just said, okay, good, super, number of moves, point, streak. And since I didn't say anything more about what was in the table, those headings aren't super duper useful. Certainly the table split across 2 pages. You already heard me complain and be upset about that. There was also no description of what the reader should be looking at. And you might even notice, like, when you looked at this, you're like, okay, there's a table. Like, what do you want me to do with this? And then I mentioned it before. There's a lot of data in this. There's a lot of data in this table. There's a lot of, anyway. If all this information is needed, okay. If some of it wasn't needed, maybe we leave it out. Maybe we put some of it in the appendix. And I hope that as you see more of these examples, as we go through some of like my better done examples, I hope that you're going to see that this table, which wasn't bad, can certainly be improved. Okay, so let's go to sort of like version 2 of this example. So this time I started at the top of the page, which means that it's all going to fit on one page. While playing the game, I recorded this information. Here it is. You'll notice that, okay, so here it is. Here's the table. Yay. What do you notice about this table? Is there anything that seems to make this better or clearer? Like how did this get improved by what I did here? Well, if we sort of scroll down to my, oh, and I actually even wrote somewhere here. It should be noted that the score screen also included information about the number of gold moves, the longest perfect streak, and the total number of moves, but at this phase in the exploration, we won't be considering that data, so it's been removed from the table. The complete table of data will be found in the appendix. So one of the things that I did here is I took out, like, what, 3 of the columns. I just sort of said, I'm not going to use that information, so I'm going to take it out here so that I can spread things out. I was able to write out total points scored and have it only take up 1 line. I was able to write X moves, OK moves, good moves, super moves, perfect moves. Because I didn't have as many columns, I was able to put more in the heading, which made the table hopefully make more sense. You might have noticed that I actually centered all of the data also. You might even have noted that I centered it not just horizontally, but also vertically. Again, you're not going to lose points for this on the IB exam, but it looks nice to do this. The way you do it in Word is by highlighting all the data that you have, and then you can right-click and go to Cell Alignment, and when you pick, like, Top Center, it'll put them in the center of the top of them. I tend to be a fan, not always, but when I have, like, data, I like to put Align Full Center, because it takes this 29 and it puts it, like, right in the middle of the box. It makes it really clear that that's where that data is. So I made the headings more clear in the table, yay. I also fit the table all into one page, and I only included the information that would be useful. The one thing that could be improved is I didn't really give a description of what the reader should be looking at in the table. I did mention what wasn't going to be used, but I didn't say how I was going to use this information. Oh, sorry. Let's go on and look at one more improvement. So example 3. I did a little bit more here. I think I added a little bit more in the beginning. While playing the game, I recorded this information. We will use the data that follows to try and develop a system of equations that could be used to find the point value of each move. So I'm kind of giving a description for what I'm about to do. Then you notice I made the headings in a gray background. This is something I like to do a lot, like stylistically. I think it helps to differentiate the headings from the rest of the thing. You do that just by highlighting the boxes, and then you can right-click and go Borders and Shading. And then under Shading, you can pick what color of filling you want. Sounds like a donut, like with a different filling. Anyway, so I picked the gray one there and then hit OK. And then you notice there's a section here that I made green. It's not clear what the green is there for right now, but if we scroll down to the end of what I have the same little paragraph as before. Yeah, I left out some information. This part here says the 4 rows highlighted in green are the ones we will use to define our system. These were chosen because they all had 0 x moves, which means we can use a system of 4 equations and 4 unknowns instead of 5 equations and 5 unknowns. I did this quickly. I probably could have done a better job of describing that. But I took the whole table and said, hey, here's all the data I had. Boom, let's look at the green section. Why the green section? Aha, right here. The 4 rows highlighted in green are what we're going to do. So the improvement that I made here is that I added a brief description of what the reader should be looking at in the table. So I hope that through this video you were able to see how we can take a table that was okay, made it a table that was good, and then made it a table that communicated really well in our exploration. So, as always, I hope that you continue to grow in your practice as writers of mathematics, and that this quick video, maybe not super quick, but this video about tables helped you to figure out how to use these tools a little bit better. So best of luck.